stop dreaming this nightmare. So in a moment of frustration, she's going to go to the Yucatan. But before I get to that, I wanted to read you her nightmare. I'm running through the jungle, vines tearing at my skin. I burst into the clearing. The old one is not there. Instead, the high priest is waiting. He signals, and I am grabbed from behind. Other priests drag me up to the altar on the pyramid temple. Struggle is useless. They pull me down onto the slab of stone and hold me firmly. The high priest stands motionless. The mist swirling amongst the trees and tangled vines thins to reveal the crouching jaguar. Drums begin to pound. The high priest raises a black obsidian knife and with a swift slash cuts open my chest. I am numb to the pain. He reaches in. In shock, I hear him give a quick evocation to the gods. My eyes grow blurry as I see him fling something down the steps. The animal pounces, snatching it in its mouth, before retreating toward the jungle. It turns back momentarily to look at me, then changes into an old woman with white hair. The priest wipes his hand over my chest before the darkness envelops me. So Tessa decides in this moment of frustration one day after she's had a therapy session, that's it. She's going to go to the Yucatan where these dreams seem to be originating and see if she can't shake something loose and stop them. She meets an archaeologist on the plane flying out of San Francisco, and they meet again later in the Yucatan, where he has offered to show Tessa and a young married couple who she's been traveling with his dig. And these are the Cobra ruins, where she first faces the issue that this might be a past life. When we stepped through the gates of Koba, a surge of anxiety caught in my throat. Nick had gotten us into Koba before the gates opened for tourists. We would have the ruins to ourselves for an hour. The closeness of the air below the canopy of the jungle felt like a living, breathing presence in the silence. Cindy and Dan talked excitedly. Nick's voice seemed far off. I couldn't concentrate on his words as he told about the history of the area. I found myself repeatedly looking over my shoulder. Over there, Nick motioned, look. A large tarantula scurried across the path into the underbrush. Cindy squealed and turned away. Then a dark figure darted through the trees, screaming. I jumped. Nick put his hand on my arm to steady me. It's just a howler monkey. He tried not to laugh out loud, but I saw one of those looks pass between him and Dan as they both smiled. The moist jungle teemed with insects. Their noise filled the space around us like a liquid hum. When we stopped, mosquitoes attacked our bare skin. They were suddenly everywhere. We covered our noses and inhaled slowly to avoid breathing them in. I was glad I had heeded Nick's advice and worn the clothes he'd recommended. Cindy danced around quickly in her minimal clothing. Where's the insect repellent? I'm being eaten alive, she shouted at Dan. I thought you brought it, he charged back. Oh no, this can't be happening, she swatted wildly. How far are the ruins, she asked, desperate for relief. A little ways yet, Nick answered. There's a soda stand ahead where we can rest. The mosquitoes will taper off there. It seemed unbelievable that there would be a hut in the middle of the jungle stocked with sodas of every kind, until I found there was no ice. I guess we can't complain, Dan shrugged. They're not cold, but it's better than nothing. After one sip of the warm, sickly sweet liquid, I decided it was worse than nothing and set it aside. We rested briefly, unanimously agreeing it was better to keep moving. The mosquitoes abated somewhat when we were moving. You do this every day? I was incredulous that anyone would choose to work here. It gets better as we move farther in, really, Nick encouraged. You'll get used to it. His calmness was only slightly comforting. Soon the mosquitoes had thinned out even more. We followed the path in silence. Finally, in that steaming jungle with its vine-draped trees, I could make out a large, dark edifice through a heavy mist, looking like it was from some old black and white movie from the 30s. My heart pounded as we approached. I hardly believed it as I stepped around the trees and stood transfixed at the base of that icon from hell, the very pyramid that had haunted my dreams. Now in ruins, it was too much to say anything. I was in too much shock to say anything. "Come on, Tessa," hollered Cindy as they started up the steep moss-covered steps. Nick gave out information that Dan devoured while clicking his camera in rapid succession. "Go on," I said, shaking. "I need a minute to catch my breath. I'll be along shortly." I swallowed hard. The thought that I'd been here before was just too crazy. I walked around the side. It was partially broken down with a tree growing out of the corner. How I knew there'd be an entrance there, I don't know. But there it was, and it was pitch black. This is the same pyramid as my dream, and it will take me to the center of the temple where the priests burned incense and received the dead bodies of those sacrificed. Following the thought that popped into my mind, I stepped into the darkness on faith. A long-forgotten memory surfaced and told me where to turn and where to duck. I reached a room that was open to the sky, the central cavity of the temple. I trembled at the images coming to mind. Bodies with their hearts ripped out, burned in this room. I ran out and threw up. My mind clamored to deny the vision. I did not want to believe it. I had been able to keep Porfirio and what happened to Teotihuacan at a distance. I told myself it was a frightful fantasy of some kind. Our lovemaking had stirred unconscious levels where death and sex were all mixed up. Not a real life that we'd shared in another time. He couldn't have been part of Ixchel's death, my death. There must be another answer. The others had already reached the apex of the pyramid when I finally started up. I tried to shake off the horrible images and conclusions fighting to be recognized. I picked my way up the slippery steps to join the others, trying to appear normal. Near the top, Nick grabbed my hand and helped me up. I looked out over the jungle as far as the eye could see. The treetops stretched out like miles of newly mowed lawn, all at the exact same height, only the occasional gray peak of another pyramid straining up out of the sea of green. "Our new discoveries are in that area," Nick pointed. "When you all feel rested, I'll take you there." I looked down at the central platform. The slab over which Ixchel's body had been stretched was broken and partially gone. I closed my eyes. Until now, I'd relegated the nightmare to some symbolic meaning. But here I was, and this place was real. I couldn't ignore that. I grabbed Nick's arm and held on. One of the lovable characters that I enjoy in this book is Jack. And I started another novel where he is the main character. So this is a little bit of Jack. A light mist hung in the air when I opened the bedroom shutters the next morning. I'd slept more soundly than I had in months and felt wonderful. No nightmares. Maybe this would work after all. I brewed a strong pot of coffee and took a cup out onto the beach. At the water's edge, the cool white sand felt soft and velvety between my toes. I sipped the coffee and watched the water swirl around my ankles. Shorebirds scurried forward each time the water ebbed out, poking at the telltale bubbles to rout out the tiny sand crabs. The water was deliciously warm and inviting. I looked around and I saw no one up or down the beach. On impulse, I set the cup down, flung off my dress, and dove into the water, the initial shock invigorating me. I swam for what seemed like an hour until I tired and all vestiges of the previous evening's misgivings had burned off. I smoothed back my hair and stood up to get out, but quickly dropped back down in the water. A tall man in rumpled white shirt and scruffy shorts stood on the shore, holding my dress on one finger. With a licentious smirk on his face, he fondled the large bowl of an ornate pipe that hung from his mouth and waited. He was American and fit the unflattering description Isabella had given me of my neighbor. "You must be Miss Harper. I'm your friendly neighbor, Jack." A bit too friendly, I grumbled. "Put my dress down." "Don't go getting all huffy. I was only trying to be a good neighbor. Tide's coming in. Your dress was about to get wet." He turned his back and held up my dress at arm's length. "Come on, I won't peek. I'm harmless." I couldn't stay in the water forever. I boldly stepped out, grabbing my dress and quickly slipping it over my head. When he turned around, he looked to be about 50. His puffy eyes and good start on a beer belly seemed to confirm Isabella's statement that he drank a lot. His salt and pepper hair was uncombed and in bad need of a trim, but his smile was friendly and irresistible. He had a bold, brusque John Huston manner, softened around the edges by a sort of Robert Redford charm. Someone you could either love or despise. I leaned toward the latter. And the last scene is Tessa had bought in the beginning of the book, oh, I wish. She bought some beads in a shop in Marin that have great significance in the story as the story unfolds. Some of the beads are stones, but they seem to be, people are telling her that they're very important and she needs to be very careful with them. So she doesn't want to reveal the stones to anyone but the people she's close to. So the archaeologists got wind of the beads and they wanted to see them, and they got her to give them up to them so they could study them in Mexico City, and she's going back now to retrieve them and find out what they've learned. When I entered the Museum of Anthropology, I looked at the slip of paper Nick had given me. It read, "Dr. Ibarra, Albert Ibarra." Jack might have been right that he was the one who bought my painting. Would he know it was of stones and not beads? I nervously stepped off the elevator, anxious to hear what he had to tell me. I was directed to his office in the back of the archaeology workroom, where artifacts lay in different stages of being cleaned, cataloged, and labeled. It was dimly lit and stuffy, reeking of dust, chemicals, and suspicion. A small man raised his head above the large pile of books and papers that sat on his desk. He looked like Sigmund Freud. I introduced myself. "Please, sit down." He walked around his desk and cleared a chair piled high with books. "I hope your trip was a good one." "Yes, thanks. I've been anxious to collect my beads and find out what you've learned about them." "All in good time. May I ask you a question first?" "Yes, of course." I didn't like the way he was staring. I was right about the suspicion. He perched on the edge of his desk and looked down at me. "It seems your beads are incomplete. Perhaps you didn't give us all of them. Inadvertently left out a few?" He searched my face, which I carefully kept expressionless. "Are there others?" He waited a moment. "He'd bought the painting, all right." I shook my head. "Why, no. I gave you all the beads I had." I felt like a little kid skirting the truth. He hadn't actually asked for stones. "You have them all." He looked over his bifocals. "I see. And where, may I ask, did you get them?" I felt like a specimen under glass. Who the hell does this guy think he is? I started to shift in the chair and caught myself. "Does that really matter? I'm here to pick up my beads and find out what you learned as we agreed." I tried to keep control of my rising anger. I didn't want to raise his suspicion further. Could he have guessed from my painting that they were stones? I sat back, but couldn't relax. This jerk was trying to intimidate me and doing a good job. I had two thoughts. First, that the markings on the stones were probably different from any of the beads. He must be the one who bought my painting and knew that I had some that were not amongst those that I gave him. Whether he knew they were stones or not, I couldn't tell. And second, if they were valuable, and I didn't tell him where I got them, he might think I bought them on the black market, and then they could be reclaimed by Mexico if deemed to be artifacts gained illegally. I could even be arrested, so I decided I'd better talk to him. If you must know, I bought them in a little gift shop in California. I probably still have the receipt. I dug through my wallet where I kept receipts, sometimes for months. I breathed a sigh of relief. Here it is, just like I said. I showed him the receipt, which he casually perused. Sorry I can't help you more than that. You know, I started painting them recently. I scanned his face to see any reaction, but saw none. Taking artistic license, of course, so the markings may have been different. I smiled brightly, hoping that was enough of an explanation to throw him off the scent of the stones. Now, why don't you tell me what you found out? You know, I really could have sworn that there would be more, he said, because these beads tell a story, and that story is incomplete. There must be more beads somewhere. Hopefully, Mr. Richardson will find them in his excavations. Visibly stymied, he seemed resigned to the fact that he'd reached a dead end with me. He explained that between the statue and the beads, they were able to decipher that some tall men from somewhere over the sea arrived in heartland of the Olmecs before 900 BC. They brought their highly sophisticated culture and knowledge of mathematics and calendrics and writing with them. I'm going to switch over rather than going into the history in the last paragraph too. As Dr. Ibarra explained about the Mayan priesthood, a strange calmness came over me. For a moment I was in a different space, disconnected from his words. The mass of confusion that had plagued me for so long suddenly dissipated. If the scientists were telling me it happened, then my dreams were validated. That past life must have been real, and I must have been there. Even if Dr. Ibarra had wanted more beads, enough to lie about this story, and even if Nick told him about my dreams, I never mentioned the stones of what the old Itza told me. He couldn't have known about what to lie about. He opened a drawer and pulled out my beads. Miss Harper, I want to thank you for your cooperation in all of this. Without your help, we could not have uncovered as much as we did. He handed them to me, obviously reluctant, and then rifled through the pile of papers. We made some drawings with the write-up. Here's a copy for you. Oh, nice, thank you. Certainly, and if you happen to find more beads, he looked over his glasses. Please contact me. I could feel his eyes follow me as I left his office. Suspicion, all right. Questions?
Tell us about your own paranormal experience.
Well, it was that one at the pyramid. And I did, when I was at Coba, and I was with another young couple, they were hopping around all over the pyramid, and I just had this, as soon as I saw the pyramid, I had this very weird feeling, very strange, like I'd been there before. And I knew there was an opening in the side of the pyramid. And I studied pyramids and Mayans, and I never knew of any of them having a doorway in the side. But I just knew there was, and I went, and there was an opening, but it was all black. It's like, why am I going there? There's spiders. But I did. And I said, I know that I'll get to someplace if I go through this tunnel, and I would. I went. It was just like that. And I had this eerie feeling that I had been there before, and whoa. That was the start of that.
So you actually did go in and did find a room in the center.
And now when I've been back to the pyramid in Coba, they have it all sealed up. It's like there's no opening. So I don't know.
You were lucky.
Maybe there never was an opening.
Yeah.
Oh.
I like that.
Very good.
Yeah. Never can tell.
Well, now that you're published, what was the hardest part?
The hardest part.
Just the writing, or the editing, or what was the biggest challenge?
I think I have to, if anybody's writing for the first time, finish the darn book and move on. The first one will never be your greatest book. 99.9% chance it won't be your greatest book. So get it finished and move on. And your next one will be better, and the next one will be better. This one took me way too long. I wrote too long on it. But I had to. You know, sometimes you just feel you got to do what you got to do.
Right.
But every time I go back to it, I find all this stuff I had to change, because as you're growing as a writer, you're always going to find more stuff, and there'll always be something to change. Even now when I read, I go, oh, I should have changed this. So yeah, that's it. For the rest of your life.